So, are you wanting to look good in front of a private equity fund either because you have a great business you want to sell to them, or maybe because you want to build a great business that you will someday sell to them? You've come to the right place because today we're going to take a look at what it takes to be an attractive private equity investment or acquisition target, as we'd say in the industry. Let's dive in. So, first, what are the pros and cons of selling to a private equity firm? I mean, are you really sure you want to? So, on the pros, let's say you've got like a great little business generating, good profit margins, just humming along. You may look at it and say, "Hey, I'm getting tired, I'm old, and I want to go and enjoy my life, what I have left of it." That can be a great reason to sell to a private equity fund. It allows you to get one big check and exit the business and move on with your life. And frankly, that's why a lot of people sell to private equity firms, especially in the middle and lower market. They've built a great business, in the manufacturing space or the services space or what have you, and they've got a good brand and they kind of dominate their local market. And private equity can be a great way to exit the business and move on. And sometimes, you're not quite ready to sell, but you think you might want to be ready to sell in the near term. And private equity can be a great solution there too. Oftentimes, private equity funds will come in, they'll buy the majority of the business, but they'll still leave a little bit for you to hold on to. Have you help them kind of navigate that transition, continue to build the business with their additional resources and support, and then sell it for an even bigger number later on down the road, and you get a second bite at the apple. And that can be a great outcome. We have a good friend of our fund that's an investor in the fund that did that exact same thing. He had built a fantastic business, him and his co-founder. They sold a big chunk of it, the majority, to a private equity investor. And then they ended up selling it to a strategic just a few years later at an even bigger number. And now he's pretty much, retired and out of the business and, flying his private planes and traveling Europe and having a great time. So, there's a lot of pros to going the private equity route. I mean, a lot better than just kind of handing the business off to either your kid who may or may not want it or even be good at it, or to other managers and taking out a loan and hoping they pay you back without destroying the business. Private equity can represent a really nice kind of clean break and way to capitalize on what you've built. The flip side is there are some definite cons. So one of the cons for you personally is, if you're running a business that's generating good profits, oftentimes you're going to lose a lot of the perks of that business. Like I know different business owners that have built in a lot of personal perks into their business, whether it's, the company owns a jet and gives them the ability to travel the world. Or the company, pays for certain things that they're able to offset and augment their lifestyle. So, losing those could be detrimental. If you've got a business that's generating a lot of profits, then, and you're taking out those profits every year, you're essentially exchanging the profits on a yearly basis for a big lump sum of money. And in some cases, depending on the business, in my opinion, you're better off just like holding on to the business for a few years because the private equity investors are only going to pay 3 to 5 times the profits of the business. So, you kind of give up that stream of ongoing income. Another con is that, maybe your employees are like your family and there is real risk that a private equity investor will come in and cut a bunch of costs, fire a bunch of employees, relocate the business. Could do a lot of things to impact kind of the people you care about and maybe your community and so on and so forth. And so there's some potential cons there because once you've sold it, you've given up control and the private equity investor can kind of do whatever they want with the brand, with your employees, with the business location, et cetera, et cetera. And, so you may not really appreciate that approach. And so you want to be really careful about who you're working with and how they're going to treat your employees and your community where you've built your business. If those are things that really are important to you, which I would hope they are. So let's assume though that, you've gotten to a place where you feel comfortable selling your business or you're okay with that as you start building your business. What kind of businesses do private equity funds like to buy? Well, honestly, there's kind of a private equity fund for like every kind of business out there. But in general, private equity funds like buying businesses that have strong, steady cash flows. What I mean by that is that they're able to demonstrate year over year that they are able to generate good profits that are relatively consistent year over year. And the reason for that is because the private equity funds, for the most part, are going to buy your business using debt. And they need to go to the banks and be able to demonstrate to the banks that you have good, strong cash flows consistently over time so that they can borrow the maximum amount of money for your business. The more stable and the more strong your cash flows are, the more likely it is that a bank will invest. Now, what do I mean by strong cash flows? Well, strong cash flows don't just mean like, yeah, like we put out, 20% profit every year from our business. What I mean by it is where do those profits derive from? So if you just have one customer, those profits aren't very strong profits, because if that customer ever decided to leave you, your business is done and over. Those profits I would consider being very weak. The flip side is if you have thousands of small customers that represent your customer base and no one customer is too big, then the loss of any one of those isn't going to ultimately hurt your business, and you'll have relatively strong profits. Another thing is barriers to entry. So if you have established yourself as a dominant player with real strong competitive advantages and barriers to entry from incumbents and from new entrants, then that also will result in having relatively strong cash flows and strong profits. That could be because you own, like maybe you are an MRI imaging business and you have distribution of imaging centers in a geographic region. And because of that, you already kind of control everything that's there. And it would be really hard for somebody to set up their own MRI imaging center in that region because you kind of already are the dominant player. You already have the relationships with the hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. Investors love those kind of barriers to entrance, right? And competitive moats. So that can result in strong profits. Another thing that could result in strong profits is the ability to demonstrate that your product is recession resilient. So for example, healthcare services and healthcare in general tends to be relatively recession resilient. If I get hurt, I'm going to go and get that problem solved regardless if we're in a recession or not. My willingness to pay for healthcare is really high. And so healthcare tends to be a good investment, and those profits tend to be really strong because it's resilient to recessions, right? Private equity investors don't want to come in and invest in something that could be wiped out by the next recession because the product is just not in demand. So for example, as a private equity investor, you may not want to build a business that builds yachts, because if we hit a recession, the number of people that have the money to spend on a yacht goes way, way down, and you may not be able to sell any yachts during that period. And yachts are very capital intensive, right? It requires a lot of capital to build a yacht. And so that sort of business could go upside down overnight. A business that's services based isn't as capital intensive and can really adjust their costs up and down depending on the broader macro environment. And so they tend to have much stronger profits accordingly. So there are a lot of ways to think about it, but as you think about the profits of the business, really analyze them in terms of, are these strong, consistent profits over a long period, regardless of kind of what's happening from an external standpoint. So what kind of sectors is that? That's sectors like healthcare services, like I mentioned. Sometimes there's some in manufacturing. Services broadly speaking, so that could be like plumbing and HVAC and all sorts of kinds of things. The other thing is like technology. So there are some really great technology firms out there. So Vista Equity and Thoma Bravo that focus on technology buyouts. For them, they're looking for businesses that are profitable. And for them, the thing that makes these businesses have really strong profits is the recurring nature of the revenue. And so, they have these long-term contracts and they have good visibility into how the company is going to perform over several years, and that gives them confidence and that the revenues and the profits are really strong and they'll invest there. Yeah, so those are generally the types of businesses. They're usually not super sexy or super exciting. There have been a bunch of different private equity funds over the years that have bought restaurants or that have bought retailers like Limited Brands and others. There are private equity shops that have bought things like Hostess Brands that make consumer products. There are a lot of different things, but in general, they're not super risky. They're generating strong profits. If you decide that you want to sell your company to a private equity fund, or you want to build one that's really set up to succeed through the sale to a private equity fund, there's a few things that you should keep in mind. So one, you're probably going to want to work with a good investment bank to help you pull together the whole deal, negotiate on your behalf, get it in front of lots of private equity funds, and really negotiate and get you the best deal possible. The other thing as part of that is you're going to put together what's called a data room. So private equity funds are going to want to dig into the overall financials, the legal docs, the structures, any lawsuits. They're going to know the organizational structure of the company. They're going to want to know how much you're paying everybody. They're going to want to see all of your contracts, at least all of your major contracts with customers. They're going to want to know your product pipeline. They're going to want to see your organizational and formation documents. They're going to make sure that everything is in order. They're probably going to do audits, or at least quality of earnings, where they hire an accounting firm to come in and basically look at your books and assess whether or not what you're reporting is accurate. They're going to include a lot of those different things as part of their due diligence. They're also going to want to spend time with the management team. They're going to want to understand who's going to run this business. If you're going to exit the business, who's going to step up and run it, who actually knows what they're doing and can do a good job, because private equity investors are not in the business of running your company, regardless of what you might think. So you need to have a good succession plan in place and know who's going to run it. And then lastly, it's all about the deal structure too. Like, a private equity investor needs to feel like they can generate a good return if they're going to buy your business. And so you need to have realistic expectations around valuation, deal structure, etc. In some cases, like I mentioned earlier, that might mean that you need to roll, as we call it in the industry, some of your equity into the next deal. So what that might look like is the private equity fund comes in and they say, okay, we're going to pay you $100 million for your business. We're going to borrow we're going to borrow a lot of that. We're going to put in some of our own. So maybe the private equity fund borrows $60 million. They put in $20 million, and then they require you to roll $20 million over, in which case you would get $80 million out of the business, but then you would retain 20% because you will have rolled $20 million of equity in that business going forward. And then, hopefully the company does well, especially under the support of this private equity fund, and they sell it to another investor, another private equity firm or a strategic, and they're able to exit it for maybe $200 million. And now that $20 million that you rolled is worth $40 million. But you have to be okay with that and rolling the additional equity instead of taking the entire $100 million. So sometimes understanding kind of those structures is important. Oftentimes there's also earnouts. So they'll say, yeah, we'll give you $100 million, but $20 million of that's dependent on you working in the business for another 2 years. And so, you have to be okay with some of those deal structures as well. But it's important to understand that those are the types of structures and the deals that the private equity funds are going to offer you. If you enjoyed this video, check out some of my other videos, like what are the pros and cons of crowdfunding.